Hello, this is Manuel from Idalco, and yet we have another podcast, and our guest for today is no more and no less than Jeffrey Tefertiller.
Thank you for having me, Manuel. I'm honored to be here. I am a service management nerd. I enjoy the topics, and excited to talk to you today. I've been in the service management space since '94, long time, and excited to talk about how service management fits in with the Atlassian products, and just talk about how all that fits together.
That sounds like a great topic, Jeffrey, because that's a really hot topic. We know that the Jira service management tool is taking quite high flight for the moment into the customers. It's getting more and more popular. And the main question we always get, or what is ITSM compatible, or does it follow the ITIL framework guidelines rather in this case? And that's a few of the things that might our listeners and viewers are interested in about, and certainly the practical sides.
Yes, and all the ITSM tools do. You know, the ITIL is a framework. It's something that's applied differently in every organization. Change management looks different, incident management, even config and asset. But most companies are putting in tools because it's a part of their bigger digital transformation strategy. It's how can we start doing things better, executing better. And most of the time with digital transformation, the question that I always start with is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And then you figure out, is this tool going to help us accomplish those outcomes? And the Jira service management tool can do that just as well as any of the others. Plus, it has a great price point for those that care.
Yeah. Well, the price point might be something that's quite sensitive now, since the price point has significantly changed while server is going end of support in the near future, in 2024. It will be in the cloud, which means for a lot of customers that pricing level will come close to the ServiceNow, Zendesk, and the others of these worlds. So it's still a better option, much better option, but it's not that far off anymore.
Yes, it's interesting because, you know, we think of the product lifecycle for this Jira service management tool, and it's going to adapt and change even in those 3 years. It's going to mature, and it's going to have its own unique qualities. The other piece to this is somebody puts in the Jira service management tool, or they're looking at how to integrate a current tool like Confluence. It just came off of an engagement. An organization, a large organization, had all of their run books, process documentation, all of this in Confluence. It's a great tool, but they had it separate than their ServiceNow tool. And I was encouraging them to integrate, which is easy. Let's not say easy. How about straightforward? And to integrate those. So now that you're in your ServiceNow tool, your service management tool, you can search for your, something's down, you look up the run book in the tool, and now you're able to fix it faster. And it pays dividends so quickly because you're able to resolve those incidents, those major incidents, much more quickly. And that's just one. And I think as we look along our digital transformation stories, we'll see how people are integrating more than adding net new. I think that's going to be one of the things we look back on. People will be integrating their sources of data just like this, or another organization that's in the Middle East called me. They're looking at how to integrate their Jira with ServiceNow and to deploy in Jenkins for their DevOps. These happen all the time. People are looking at how can I integrate my tools together and still remain compliant for their service management needs.
It sounded really like an example that's within the specialties of IDALCO. In this case, we do a lot of those integrations and synchronizations, which we have our product for, Exalate, for example, to connect a Jira to a ServiceNow, for just an example.
Oh, yeah. And even on that, for that DevOps example, the whole key is how do we remain compliant for change management? Because you're deploying thousands of times a minute, possibly. How do you have change records? And so those integrations allow, I always look at the balance between bureaucracy and governance. And so you want the speed to delivery without the bureaucracy, but you still have the governance.
Yeah, if you would advise any company to start with a correct implementation of a framework, which advice would you give to them?
I would always start with what is it we're trying to solve? And that's why I like ITIL, because ITIL is all about, even ITIL 4, the new one, is about co-creation of value with your customers. How do we understand what they're trying to solve and help them solve it? Now, I'd probably go with how do we measure progress? Then do we have the correct resources and leadership support? Resources could be people, it could be integrations and tools. How can we adjust on the fly, knowing the variables will change? If nothing else, I always think about this example. A year ago today, there's no way we could have fathomed what that year would have become, right? And how do we become so nimble that we can adjust course in a way that we're able to meet the new and changing business needs? And since we can't, and this is the last one, which I think is always something to ponder, since we can't do everything, what's our mechanism for prioritizing? Because there will be things that we have to put on the back burner. And so how do we keep those, yet acknowledge that we're not going to be able to get to them in the short term?
Okay, putting procedures in place and ways of working is a great thing. I suppose sometimes one important part sometimes get forgotten is that you need to train the people.
Oh, yes.
The way of working.
Oh, yes. And that's the one thing that's funny is ITIL way back when started with people, process, and technology. And I've always been of the belief that no matter what technology or what process, your people have to execute those. And if they are not empowered or they don't feel like they can, you're not going to be successful. And so they're the ones that carry out your processes or procedures. They're the ones that help your technology be successful. And this includes all your business stakeholders, your users, your process people. It all comes down to the people, as it does for IDALCO and every other company. We'll never be successful without the good people.
So that would be another topic, how to get good people. But we'll stay today with the with the ITSM part in this case. Let's say we do encounter regularly companies that are have a significant size and they don't have any tool whatsoever at their disposal. They have to start from scratch. So you say, okay, let's get what you want to solve. What's your issues you're encountering? What's the situation you have for the moment? What are the problems? What's your impact on those problems or issues you want to solve? And then you'll probably distill the requirements that they may have in kind of processes that need to be taken care of. And then probably at the last stage, you will look into a tool.
Yes. And so that's what's really interesting here in the US. A lot of companies lead with the tool and then they have too much of a mess at the end to figure out because they're adapting their process to the tool. They're adapting everything to the tool. Where if you do it the other way and you figure out, what is I'm trying to solve and work everything down and then have the tool to support it, your tool will be successful. Because if not, you're only going to be as mature as that tool can help you. And the example I always give, at least recently since ITIL 4 has come out, ITIL 4 changes the vernacular and the verbiage, but it changes other things. But all the ITSM tool makers are still using ITIL v3, which is perfectly fine. But if one of your goals is to get to ITIL 4, you better find that tool that's going to be able to help you make that jump to ITIL 4 without having the dog wagging the tail, so to speak.
You've been mentioning a few times the 4.
Yes.
What's so different in comparison to the former versions?
Oh, that's a great question. So ITIL v2 was IT centric. v3 came out in 08 and then had an update in 11. And it turned to be focused on the business customer. But if you think about how many IT organizations are set up, especially those that have outsourced operations, where you have strategy, design, transition, or release, if some people would think of it that way, release, change management, and then operations, and then continual service improvement. That's v3. And so where a lot of organizations have outsourced their operations, which is fine. Now ITIL v4 allows for more of instead of going through that life cycle, it has value streams. So you will not go through each one of those steps to get to the end. The cycle times, it's going to look like a DevOps where there's a feedback loop. It's going to have things that spin a lot faster. And so ITIL 4 may be a little ambitious for organizations, but it's trying to stay in step with where the business customers of IT are trying to go. And so it's going to turn a lot of things on its head, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Let's say I have nothing. I have no tool, and certainly my aim is to become an ITIL or ITSM company that works through a framework. How much time would I require to implement such thing, and how much time would it take from the organization in itself? If you would, let's say, I know you can do like a few steps of it, and then, but let's say theoretically we do the whole process, which is, I know, quite rare that everybody does the whole part of it. But if you would do the whole process, how much time would it take from the organization in itself to get organized in that way? How much throughput?
Months. And the reason, there are two things to consider. One is the scope of your processes, which is what usually is your scope of your CMDB, your configuration management database. And it just means that whatever is a configuration item, if it's broken, it's an incident for break fix. Or if we're making a change to it, we have to document that change, it's under change management. So understanding scope. And you alluded to trying not to, in this more of my phrase, try not to boil the ocean, try not to do too much, because a lot of times companies who try to do too much are unsuccessful. But the other thing is the scope of the CIs as well as the processes, because since we spoke a minute ago, the people you need to be successful. Internally, you probably can't grow your staff that quickly and be successful. And you probably, if you're starting from scratch, you're not going to have that many strong people in those areas right off the bat. And so a lot of times you'll want to start with incident, change, sometimes CMDB, and also request meaning, when you go into the portal, order a laptop, order some software, and have it route. Second phase of maturity is usually problem management, and then some of the financials like IT asset management, things of that nature. And IT asset management, along with its subcategories of software and hardware asset management. One of the only ways where an organization can save real dollars or real euros.
Yeah. So considering if you would implement it correctly, it's just not a new way of working, but the goal, in fact, of any way of working should be that at the end you have a good return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
That's what everybody wants to know. We want to be more efficient, more lean and mean. And
oh yeah, and most of the time, and you talk about ROI, software asset management is one where organizations are saving 20-30% on their software costs, even for things to enable them to, for example, pull off or identify people who have left the organization that they're still paying software costs on. That seems like a small thing, but it's usually 10%. Because, you know, when people come and go in an organization, a large organization, people, the administrators don't go in and change, you know, who has the ability. And that doesn't get into the, are we over licensed or under licensed, things of that nature. And then on the hardware side, what's interesting is the issue of decommissioning technical debt. And so when I mentioned earlier that it's always best to integrate as much as possible without adding net new, because when we add net new, we usually have something that gets put on the back burner that we're still paying for that we're not using, shelfware, as it may be. And so hardware asset management helps in that regard.
yeah, and let's being asset management and incident management, one of the new features that's been added to the Jira Service Management, as you said, to make it a more mature tool in this case. If we come back to it in a nutshell, it's the goal is to structure, to know what's going on, to have control, because that's most of the time what a process needs to do. You want to be in control. You want to be in control of the execution. You want to be in control of the result. And you want to be in control of the data that you get out of it to do whatever action that could be required. Could go from marketing till HR till whatever, to see what the costs are or usage or anything else. Is there kind of, you could say it's maybe too simple to put it like a checklist where you can say, okay, we want to know as a company if that to achieve a working ITIL environment or ITSM environment, what do I need? What do I need to invest, for example?
Well, I've seen people have with or without the tool, like you mentioned, but if the goal is standardized outcomes, and so like if something's broke, you know, a server's down, we want to be able to resolve it in a consistent, standardized manner. You get into service level management on the ability to measure those outages and resolutions. But the one thing that we're going to want to do is make sure, whether we have a tool or not, that we have the people in the process. And then the tool helps log, route. So like on an incident, it's going to route that ticket to the right group. It's going to give them the information that they need. Like I mentioned a minute ago with the integration between Confluence and ServiceNow, it's going to be able to equip that group to respond and resolve more quickly. And at the end of the day, it's all about the standardization and us being able to do things in a repeated way. So then we're not as, in a term, we're not in this hero mentality where somebody does, you know, we look to Joe or Sally or somebody to do it because they're the ones that do it right all the time. But we have this methodical process that we know how to execute correctly every time.
Okay. Would there be any specific kind of size of a company that requires to implement such a way of working? Let's say I'm an extreme case. I'm a company with 5 people. That's it. but service company. And on the other hand, you have the 120,000 people service company. So meaning everybody has a laptop, 120,000 pieces.
I've seen 5 people companies have the tool because they're servicing their customers and they need to be able to respond to their customers in a methodical way and track all the tickets.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen these huge companies who do everything on spreadsheets, and instead of buying a tool, they use SharePoint or something in a workflow to track all those just the same.
Yeah.
And so that's why it gets down to being able to do it repeatably for that organization.
Yeah.
But the SharePoint is pretty interesting only because, you know, it has a workflow. That's all they're using it for, is the workflow.
Yeah. Brings me to an anecdote that we encountered. You're talking about Excel and managing that part. We had once a discussion with a customer that managed no more, no less than 1,200 people, their planning, their assets in an Excel. And they wanted to show it to us, and it took 12 minutes to load the Excel sheet. And on top of it, they worked with several people in the same sheet. So that is what I call the perfect cocktail to make huge mistakes.
Oh, yes. And the other reason why people go to a tool, in the US, if you're publicly traded, you're bound by Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX. It's an output or an outshoot of the Enron scandal a few decades back. So now all of your changes for change management have to be recorded, and you have to have who authorized the change, were they at the right level, is testing approvals done by somebody different than somebody did the code, things like that. And so while you can handle that in a spreadsheet or SharePoint, it gets kind of cumbersome if you're a publicly traded company in the US.
Oh, yeah. Here, SOX compliancy is less relevant. On the other hand, we have ISO 27001, which is more kind of a security level, but it's very complementary to the SOX. It doesn't have much differences in between them. So for those who listen and you're based in Europe, well, you will be closer to the ISO 27001 in this case.
Oh, yes. But it's just one of those drivers is all I was getting at is,
yeah.
If you're a publicly traded company, you're going to be audited. They're going to come in and they're going to look for those segregation of duties for those changes as a control for your company.
Okay. So, and what would be if you would have if Shakespeare would be involved in this case, is it you would say to be or not to be? Is it ITIL to be or not to be? But I think the conclusion is quite clear that any way of having well-trained and good people in the first place, then adapt the way of working of those people, or have a workflow with those people, and then have a tool that just organizes it, everything, and that saves work instead of creating work, because that's sometimes also the complexity of some ways tools gets far beyond any usability.
Oh, yes. And take that a step further. Our technology is seeping outside of IT, right? And so in a hospital, there are technology assets sitting in hospital rooms that'll soon be in an ITSM tool. In a bank, how about ATMs? You look at every type of industry, what was in traditional IT, and some people think of IT and OT, operational technology.
Yeah.
Those are going to be combined soon under the same change management, incident management. And so how can you do those in a standardized manner? And that's why I would always say to be, to answer your question.
Yeah. Okay. So meaning in this case that Just like the Atlassian tools can be used and are very known to be used as developer tools for developer environments, we see nowadays that because a process, a workflow is a workflow, so people use it for HR. We have people using it for marketing processes within their company because it's to collaborate. It's for teams that want to work in an agile way. So everything has a benefit by having good processes and good people in the picture before you start working with a great tool to route everything.
Right. And you mentioned Jira. Jira is the standard and people use for their agile. And I get these questions all the time. Can agile and service management or ITIL coexist? And I'm always like, sure, people put those walls and divisions, and how those coexist are going to look different in every organization. That's fine. But it's not that big of a deal. The bigger piece is the culture. And so you're not square peg, round hole, trying to hit that thing harder to get it in and making it a natural fit. Take change management in agile. You have your natural sprints to get your approvals, to get it through your change management approvals, from your product side over to your change management, go live. Then if it has an incident after go live, how do you get that feedback loop back into your agile teams to be able to remedy the situation?
Yeah. And also, as you said, outside the classic operation or tech operations environment, it can be used. We have customers using it to manage their contracts. It's a virtual thing. It's an asset, a contract, and it goes through changes. And those changes are linked to documents and so on. And then you see the whole flexibility of having those tools linked together because of the processes that are in front of it. And it's perfectly doable. And not only see everything in that matter in the IT environment, but also larger. That's what I understood from your explanation.
Oh, yes. But think about I use the hospital, all the technology in the hospital rooms, whether it's the
ECG.
Yes. Or even the computer that they log in all the meds, right?
Yeah.
If that's down, that hospital can't use that room because the $20 keyboard,
Yeah.
and or scanner. And it's kind of crazy because that becomes a business problem because, the hospital bills thousands of dollars per half day for that room. And they need to be able to, for a $20 keyboard, IT gets yelled at.
We will say those prices are US only.
Yes. In the US, it's pretty egregious. And all I was getting at is, they're going to want to track those. They're going to want to be able to trend those out for like problem management for our IT service management people. Let's look for common incidents and look for the root cause. What happens if you just bought a bad batch of keyboards or scanners or whatever it is? I'm using a simple example, but banks with ATMs, there's so many examples out there where technology is creeping into the service management world, and your agile teams and how you track things and defects. It's all this, it's all the same. It's just a different type of technology asset.
Yeah. Okay. If we would come to a conclusion, because we come a little bit more or less to the end of this discussion, would you anything to add or a kind of a conclusion that you want to give to our dear listeners and viewers?
Well, I thank you for having me on, and it's been a pleasure. I would encourage everyone to make sure that they don't add as little of net new as possible. Look to integrate. When we talked about integrating Confluence with ServiceNow or the whole DevOps stream or Jira with your service management tool, figure out how do you integrate so you can take advantage of the best of what you have. Because when you add net new, it's always going to cost more with the technical debt. And it's one of those things that a soapbox I've been on this last several months, just because I see so many organizations pay for 10, 20% of hardware and software that should be decommissioned.
Yeah. No, good. That's excellent. It rests me to thank you as well to be present here and to elaborate on the ITSM and ITIL part, which is for me not so familiar because I'm not a very technical guy, but even for me it was understandable. So that's like a landmark. If I can understand it, almost everybody should be able to understand it. In this case, thank you very much, Jeffrey, and I wish you a very great day, and maybe in the near future for another topic in another podcast.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Have a great day.